Hi, this is Aarti Shah. I'm here with Bill Coletti for another episode of The Heart and Science of Creative Leadership. So, this is another episode in our Icon series, which we spotlight trailblazing agency owners who've sort of defied odds, sort of built standout brands, and sort of reshaped their industries. We have candid conversations. We kind of explore the grit, the vision, and the resilience that it takes to turn these bold ideas into thriving businesses. And one thing I've noticed as we've been doing these Icon series is the people that I've been gravitating to are those that I met very early in my career as a PR journalist, and they seem to have the most sort of profound impact. Perhaps because I feel like I kind of witnessed their career trajectory. And today we have another one of those early meetings that I had way back. I must have been 2007. I met with Barbara Bates, who had then been running Eastwick Communications, I think since the 90s, with two of her best friends. They had survived she calls it the dot bomb of the late 90s, and they had built a respectable boutique agency in Silicon Valley. But what I watched her buy out her two friends over the course of the next few years, especially I think was the economy slowed down again around 2008. She bought out her two friends, and I thought to myself, I said, where's this going? But she continued to grow. She continued to build. She named a successor, Heather Kernahan, who was today global CEO of the agency. And then the big seismic shift happened when she was bought by Hotwire. Hotwire was this brand out of the UK that was one of the best tech agencies out of the UK. She was bought by Hotwire, owned by Anero. And Barbara rose to the ranks of becoming global CEO of Hotwire, and then eventually becoming a chair at Anero, the parent company. And today she is semi-retired, I think. It sounds like, as she'll talk about during our conversation. And she's built quite a career. I really enjoyed the conversation that we had.
Yeah, it was fabulous. And Aarti, I just thank you so much for your, first of all, your amazing career that you've had so many contacts that they've been able to bring to us and that we get to share. And your fondness for her is obviously impressive to me, but having spent time with Barbara was also very impressive. She has a lot of really good perspectives and ways of looking back over the long arc of her career. And so first of all, thank you. It's awesome for that. But I also think that folks can learn a couple of things. How to work with your friends is an example. They rotate their CEO when she talks about that for a context. We also talked about company brand, personal brand, and product brand and the implications for that. And so I think she has a lot of relevant thoughts about today that I think owners can operationalize. So again, thank you.
Yes. Oh, well, you're very welcome. I'm honored to continue my relationship with a lot of these people who are not just interesting business people. I think the way they view our profession, or at least the way they view public relations, is I learn so much from them, and they're just great humans, right? I think that's what makes sort of keeping the relationship warm worthwhile. Before we go into our conversation with Barbara, let's do our heartbeats and science experiments. So, Bill, if you would please go first with your heartbeat.
So I've got a heartbeat. So I am in a entrepreneurial mastermind with about 40 different entrepreneurs, different industries. Some are coaches. There's a few agency owners in it. Some are building houses in Ireland. So it's kind of a mixed bag of owners. But there was this conversation that someone put into a chat that we all participate in about how could entrepreneurs use Sunday afternoon or Sunday generally, Sunday evening, afternoon, whatever the context was. And it was a very heartwarming, gratifying, 25 chat, a thread of about 25 different messages just about how people use it. Some people learning new ways to help get ahead and plan for their week. Some people that needed to be reminded that focusing on family is kind of what Sundays should be about. Some people talked about faith, but it was very heartwarming for me to be in this group. And I kind of spurred the conversation along with asking how people use, as entrepreneurs, how do you use your Sundays? So it was very gratifying. So just as an add-on, Aarti, how do you use Sundays? Is it do you use a couple hours to get ready for the week or the following or the week upcoming, or how do you use Sundays?
try to keep Sundays fairly low key, especially once you hit like the afternoon, evening. But I've been finding, and this is actually, maybe this is connected to what my heartbeat is those real life interactions, like just stepping away from screens, stepping away from trying to interact in that way, and really using those to solidify community and connection in real life is, I found that that's increasingly the way that I enjoy spending my Sundays. Obviously with my family, but then also with our broader community, whether that's our neighbors, whether that's our friends, is sort of making sure that we fit in as many real life interactions and connections as possible. And especially on Sundays, I think there's something really nice about a slow brunch with people that you love. Can I ask you, Bill, what do you do? How do you spend your Sundays?
So I try to take at least 45 minutes, maybe an hour, but I try to limit it because it's easy to consume, at least to look at my calendar of what's upcoming. And occasionally I'll send some messages that say, hey, where are we on this, so that it lands in somebody's inbox. But I try to take an hour, a little less than an hour on Sunday, more than anything, just to prepare for the week upcoming, and sort of reflect on it. So it's very simple. Just try to think about what's coming up and just look at my calendar in a weekly view and kind of get an idea of the contours of the week.
Right. And I think I think that pays its dividends. For anyone who has regularly done that and then skipped a week, notices such a big difference. Because I do that as well. We end up doing this just by planning logistically, like, who has to be in Menlo Park this week? Who's got, what's going on this week? But it does, if we haven't done that on a Sunday evening, thinking of it, just reflecting on, all right, well, what's the day that I really need to hunker down and I have deadlines. You notice it the weeks that you don't do it. And it kind of feels, I always feel like the weeks that I don't do it feel a little more chaotic, like they kind of slip away from me.
Yeah. Good stuff. Good
Yeah.
stuff.
I'm going to build on that heartbeat just in terms of my response. And this isn't quite what I was going to say, but I think I'm just going to go in this direction. Setting aside time for in real life, in interactions and connection. We have some of our neighbors, they hang out outside quite a bit. And, it's always cold in the Bay Area. Like I'm always cold. So I oftentimes don't go out because I'm like, oh, it's too cold. I'm just going to stay in. But I've started going out more recently, and just the quality of these casual conversations, it almost reminds me of like when we lived in the dorms, right?
Sure.
And, when you would go out and you would just talk, you would just know people because of proximity, but that's sort of a gift, right? Because you can kind of come back and return to conversations again and again. And I was telling my husband the other day, I was like, we have really great neighbors. I was like, we have such great neighbors, and I really enjoy these conversations we have with them. So now I make it more of a point to go out there. And another friend of mine invited me to the city of Oakland is having a mayoral election on April 15th. And she's invited me to a few town halls that, all of the candidates go to. And I've already gone to, I've gone to two now. She asked me to go to one on this Sunday. And I was like, oh gosh, I kind of have made my mind up. But I was like, I want to go because I want to feel I want to feel more connected to the community. And I went, and it was really interesting. I didn't learn anything really new from the candidates, but I learned from watching the audience. Like, what were people clapping about? Where were their frustrations? And this audience was at an Episcopalian church in Montclair, so it was a very small venue. And so I kind of got a better read on the audience and what people care about. And I just feel much more connected to the place that I live. So anyway, I think in real life engagements, it's so easy in
That's
our
a good
world.
One. I love that.
To just stay online, and it really makes a big difference.
Yeah. What do you got for a science experiment?
So my science experiment, actually, I went to an acting class on Saturday.
Nice.
It was a one day workshop, and I used to act when I was younger, and I haven't taken an acting class in over a decade, but I really was missing it, and I missed that creative outlet. And I learned about the Meisner method, and it's basically the idea is it's living truthfully in imaginary circumstances. And the idea is you don't intentionally perform, you don't intentionally entertain, that if you just respond truthfully to your scene partner, that will be enough. The audience will respond to that. And, they use repetition because I think we're not inherently good at this. So they use a lot of repetition. Like, Bill, I would say to you, like, you have a white shirt, and you would have to respond to me, I have a white shirt. And we would just go back and forth and I would have to tune into the nuances of like, do you really believe me? Are you getting annoyed with me? And I just thought about how we should use this in our interpersonal communications outside of acting, right? like respond truthfully in pretty much any circumstance. Now, granted, it's not always appropriate.
Sure.
Sometimes we can't respond truthfully, but how in those moments we're trying to build connection with others,
Right.
um, just that
So, ma'am,
responding
did you know that you were
truthfully.
speeding? So, like one of that might be an example, right?
Yes, 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 exactly, exactly. So yeah, it was really beautiful, and I really enjoyed it.
That's awesome.
Mhm.
So my science experiment is dual language learning. So for the past year or so, I've been working on Spanish, and decided to just tap the brakes for a second and dig in. There's a program called Language Transfer, and dig in and see if I can do 2 weeks of Italian. And I'm just curious the erosion or if the support that I get of trying to tackle two languages at the same time.
So
It's
are
just a
you
2 week little experiment.
okay? So you're studying Italian for this 2 weeks
Yeah, but I'm just
interval.
curious how if my Spanish goes backwards or what
Yeah.
happens on Spanish. Yeah,
And why Italian?
Coletti rhymes with spaghetti.
Yeah, there we go. Good reason. Good reason. Well, and how
We'll
is your
see how it
Spanish
goes.
coming? Can I ask how your
Spanish
Spanish is coming?
My Spanish is coming along nicely. My wife's is progressing better.
Hmm.
She's a little bit more earnest. But I've got a dated pencil for the first of the next month to really lean in for I do a little 90-day sprint. So
Nice.
so it's coming up. So yeah, so I'm pleased. My comprehension is good. Speaking is obviously a challenge. Past tense and future tense are hard. Present's real easy. So my life exists in the moment.
Yes.
In all my Spanish conversations because I don't have
Right.
future and past tense.
Oh, yeah. I mean, right. Yeah.
I'm very
Um,
dynamic right
that's
now.
that's always the challenge with, I think, but yeah, it's like remembering all of those, all
Yeah.
of the tenses.
Yep.
Well, that's exciting. Should we jump into our conversation with Barbara?
Absolutely. I think you're going to get a lot out of this conversation.
Welcome, Barbara. And you are joining us from Carmel, gorgeous Carmel, which I'm sure many of our listeners know. Did you move just before the pandemic, or was this a pandemic move?
Yes, actually, I was still living in San Francisco full time when the pandemic hit, but I had bought a house down here in Carmel. So as soon as I didn't have to travel globally anymore, I moved to Carmel and have been here ever since. So 5 years, actually. Five
Yeah.
years.
And you're kind of enjoying, I mean, is it fair to say that you're retired these days, Barbara?
Yeah, but art is a good word. It's not a bad
Mm-hmm.
word.
Yes.
A retired is yeah, I'm primarily retired. Yes, I still have a few relationships that I keep up more on the business side, but for the most part, I'm spending my time playing mahjong and golf and taking care of my grandkids and enjoying beautiful Carmel.
I
So,
mean,
Yeah.
there are.
So I want to stay there just for a second, Aarti. Barbara, and we're going to talk about more of this. You built one of the most dynamic firms and then took it nationally and then took it and were involved with it internationally. When in that journey, if you can, did you think about retirement or
Ah.
did you fear retirement?
Mm.
gosh, that's funny that you asked that, Bill, because that's probably the question I get the most right now from people. Either
People
they're
of a certain age.
are afraid of it, or even actually younger people who, I'm not going to brag, but I'm pretty blessed that I have a pretty amazing life, and so they look at my life and they go, how do I get there? And so I would say I never thought about retirement. Now it's funny, I just had this conversation with my kids the other day, and I did think about quitting a zillion times. Being the entrepreneur of a tech agency, a PR, any kind of service agency, is not for the faint of heart. So but retirement, I never really thought about. And honestly, I wasn't sure how I was going to ramp down. The consulting relationship with Anero was such a gift because that was a nice ramp down for me. It was a win-win-win situation for Hotwire, for me, for Anero. So that worked out. It worked out phenomenal. But it was a pretty quick ramp down. I mean, I wasn't working that much. And what I realized pretty early on is I really left it all on the table, Bill. I worked my you know what, ass off for a really, really long time. And I didn't owe it to anybody, including myself, that I had to jump in and do something else. I had pictured myself that I was going to be on boards. I was going to do all this, consulting and all that. And I could done all of that. And I realized, you know what? Life is short. I paid my dues. I am ready to enjoy it. And I think I've done retirement really well, to the surprise of most of my family and friends. They thought I was going to be a complete nightmare. And what was I going to do with myself? Because my kids kept saying, Mom, you have no hobbies. What are you going to do when you retire?
Yeah.
So I'm here to tell you, jump right in. The water is fine. And it's amazing how busy you can get. And yeah.
Well, let's
That's great.
let's go.
Not only surviving, but thriving.
Yes, yes. And I want to go back to that, because the reason it sounds like people were so surprised that you are so comfortable, moving into this next chapter, is because they've known how ambitious you are, right? And I remember this from when I met you, 2007, and at that point you had been, running Eastwick for over a decade, I think. You bought your partners out, and then you took things up to the next level when you got acquired by Hotwire. Then you were part of an RO, and you were, helping them with acquisitions. So let's go even further back. What did ambition look like for a young Barbara Bates? Like when did you come across this ambitious spark, and you knew, and maybe you didn't know exactly what you wanted to do, but you knew you wanted to do something big?
Honestly, I do think I did have that ambitious spark from the very beginning, very early days.
Is this where you tell the Girl Scout cookie story? That you sold millions of dollars of Girl Scout cookies?
Yeah. Aarti, you can relate to this, Aarti. When you could decide to be a journalist, you have to be freaking brave and a hustler and, all of that. And that takes some ambitious. I mean, here I was getting my first on-air job at a ripe old age of 22, moving across country, showing up my very first day. The sports anchor was out on vacation, so I did the sports, my very first broadcast on air for an NBC affiliate. You got to have some cojones to do that, like some guts to do that. And so I think, that thread of, call it ambition, call it adventurous, whatever it is, that I think I always had a bit of that. Did I ever think that was going to translate into me running a $50 million business? No, that I would say was not the plan. Now, if you talk to my predecessor at Hotwire, Heather Kernahan, that was her plan. She's ambition on steroids, and she's done an amazing job. So I would say we were more, accidental entrepreneurs, and success breeds success. It's kind of a corny thing to say, but when you're onto something and it's fulfilling a need, it fuels you to just keep doing more of that. Bill, you can relate to that as well. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
That's a big part of it. One thing I would say though is this entrepreneur spirit. I did not just get at Eastwick. I started my agency career at an agency called the Benjamin Group. And if anybody knows Sherry Benjamin, she was a force of nature as well. And the thing that I learned from her is, don't be afraid to do things different and to do it your way, because she did that in her own flavor of things. And I would say, challenging the status quo was always something that was part of my DNA, and Eastwick in general. We started out as something different, and that worked for us. So it gave us sort of the permission to do things, to try new things and do things differently.
Yep. I think, just to take this back to our listeners, right, as they are wondering, like, do I have it in me? Do I have what it takes? And you don't necessarily, Bill, to your point, you don't have to be the person that sold a million Girl Scout cookies, right? Look at other examples in your life, and when you were willing to take a big risk, in which everyone else probably said, "What are you doing?" or "You're crazy." And Barbara, I think people don't think about when you choose to be a journalist, like what kind of risks you have to take. You have to show up in cities like Raleigh, North Carolina, that you've never been to before, and you're told, and back in those days, right? Here's a map. Like, go,
Exactly.
right? And just talk to strangers. Like, here's a notebook, talk to these strange people. And, like those ways in which, you have to be bold and take risks that we don't think about necessarily in a straight business context.
Those all prepare you for being an entrepreneur and starting and running your own
Mhm.
business successfully. 100%. I agree with that.
So go back to sort of day one or day minus whatever when Eastwick came together. And I know your two partners were there a little bit before you, but talk about that at the beginning. What was your vision? What were you guys building? How did you make payroll on that first Friday? Sort of talk about sort of day one mindset that you had.
Yeah. So we started out as kind of three consultants who were signing on our own clients and asking each other to help us do the work. And then we started getting, really big clients. We were tiny, where there was the three of us, and
No admin support. I mean, any support, or just really the three of you?
You know what? We did pretty early on have a contractor as an admin support, and she ended up being our first full-time hire when we eventually started hiring employees. So yes, there was some, but not in the beginning. Honest, Bill, we did it all. We kind of did it all, and we would pull in other contractors, some of which we're talking. This is 91. How many years ago? Like many years ago. And I'm still friends with some of those early contractors that we worked with. When you're in the trenches and doing those, that kind of hard work, you tend to create lifelong relationships. But in that early day, we were kind of consultants that were helping each other out. But I think the turning point was all of a sudden we started getting big clients, and people thought we were bigger than we were. And we put a name on it, Eastwick. And, a lot of people always want to know where that name came from. I think most people know by now that a friend of ours that knew all three of us was like, oh my gosh, it's like the Witches of Eastwick, when the three of us decided to go into business together. And we were like, okay, we like that. It stuck. So our clients referred to us as the witches. We did Halloween parties every year. And that just made us all kind of seem, bigger than we really were. And because the three of us had worked at big agencies before, our network was really, really good. And so much of our early clients, those big clients like, Oracle and Novell and even Apple Education and, big name clients helped us seem more legit, if that's,
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually there is a little bit about momentum. Then we got to a point where we're like, geez, we really got something here that is fulfilling a need. And we made a decision to really make it a true business partnership. And that's when we started hiring people and doing all the HR things and, all of that type of stuff. So
One of the questions, given how much you've seen, right, 91 to really, until very recently, and what I've noticed is how often the pendulum sort of swings and what is the prevailing wisdom shifts. And if you're an entrepreneur today where it feels like that's happening at even a faster pace, how would you recommend folks navigate, and how did you navigate that? And just as a couple of examples, right? Like, I remember when I started doing this, I had agency owners tell me, oh, well, the reason the bomb happened is because too many agencies, sorry, the reason the PR industry was impacted the way that it was too many PR agencies exchanged, took equity in exchange for retainers. And now I have seen that come back with full force. And at the time, it was just considered to be dumb, like bad business, right? And now suddenly I have agencies bragging about the fact that, oh, we're agile and nimble. We're adjusting to the market conditions. Again, we see this with the behemoths versus the independents, right? The move towards everybody wants a best-in-class boutique agency, and then the pendulum swings and no procurement wants everything consolidated under one. So given the fact that I have seen these things swing so many times in the time that I've covered this industry, how would you recommend owners today navigate that?
That's the number one reason why I say this is not for the faint of heart. And people for a long time, this is probably the thing that I'm quoted on the most, is don't ride the roller coaster. because
Mm,
you will emotionally not be able to take riding all the highs and all the lows to its, their full levels, because no human being can go through all that and survive. So
mhm,
you have to celebrate the wins for sure, but keep a sort of a level head with you. And I do think during the heydays, there's people who make really bad choices. They over invest in things. They get a little bit too, um, greedy.
mhm,
If I'm one thing that Elaine and Nancy and I did is we kept our money in our business for the longest time. Our banker loved us because we always had a ton of cash in the bank. And that was the thing that why Eastwick stuck around for 35 years, because we could ride those highs and lows and make smart decisions. We were also known for having one of the best benefits packages and having incredible culture. So we didn't do that at the expense of trying to nickel and dime our staff. I think that was one of the smartest things that we did, is that we really ran the business for the long term, and we knew that meant riding the highs and lows, and there were quite a few of them. When you have to lay off 2/3 of your staff almost overnight, and that was the dot bomb uh, era, literally that happened overnight. Um, and there were some agencies that didn't make it because of the stock thing. Oh, we probably know, are these some of those that all of a sudden they found themselves,
mhm.
on the wrong side of that, had taken too much stock.
So don't
And
ride the roller coaster. I want to make sure I understand that, but I want you to explain it a little bit. But I want to ask a question related to that. That's easier said than done, because
oh,
momentum, like gravity, is real, and you feel it. So I'm mashing up a couple of topics here. So you've talked in the past about trust and shared values and working with your
yeah,
friends.
yeah,
Momentum is real, and riding the roller coaster feels like a fun ticket to some people. How did you guys, and in particular you, where did you find the grounding not to get caught up into that momentum, not to get caught up into that energy, not do some of the things that you successfully avoided, spending all
yeah.
your cash, taking stock? So talk about that between the three of you, of grounding each other to make good decisions.
Yeah. First of all, I will say I chose to go into business with two very smart people. Nancy was a Stanford grad, Elaine was a Cal grad. I always felt so less than because I didn't go to a prestigious college, but I did have the hustle factor and the scrappy factor that fit in with the three of us. But we actually, going back to that shared values thing, this is something I spoke about a lot, not only just with our partnership, because as you can imagine, having been around a really long time, there are a number of agencies that reached out to us and said, "There's three of us women we are thinking about it. Everyone says it's a bad idea. You guys have been so successful. How did you do it?" And I have to go back to that shared values thing. You talk about, like, the hard decisions you'll have to make over time, and if you're not all on the same page, that makes it very, very difficult. And we were on the same page. And so when it came to those decisions, we lined up very much. I honestly, and I'm telling you the truth, I cannot think of a major conflict that we had when it came to those kinds of big decisions. And we just and honestly, and if there was, it probably had a lot to do with when Nancy chose to retire. She did actually leave the business right after the dot bomb crisis. And Elaine left, right around the time of the bank crisis, the financial crisis. So those probably had a big impact on their decisions. But I would say that shared value thing also played a huge role in being acquired, who we chose to be acquired by, because we had been approached by every major PR agency brand you can imagine, and we were always sort of considered the last one standing. Uh, Me and Lou Hoffman, and it wasn't until you could really see and experience shared values that you know that that's when that's going to make a great partnership. And I would say that's what happened with, the three of us in the very beginning too.
So, Barbara, I want to ask you about something that I used to hear about back when I was a reporter. I heard that there was a meeting of owners, and I don't know exactly the cadence of it. Was it quarterly? Was it a few times a year? It was a quarterly. So tell me about this, because I would hear about, I mean, owners from agencies of all sizes. Barbara, I know you were involved, and I think you were on the larger end of the spectrum. And there were also sort of owners who had just hung up their shingles a year or two ago that were getting together and kind of talking about best practices, challenges that you all were facing. So tell me a little bit about this and what value you derived from it as one of the larger agencies in this cohort.
Yeah. So first, shout out to Sherry Benjamin and Andy Cunningham, who did this a decade before at least. That gave me the idea. And yeah, people thought I was completely whacked. I reached out to agency heads that I knew and liked, and some agency heads that I didn't know but I respected. And I invited them for a quarterly dinner and just gave a suggestion on the kinds of conversations that we could have and how we could get to know each other. And people were incredibly skeptical, as you can imagine. Like, we're competitors. What the heck are we going to talk about? We had those dinners for at least 10 years. When I actually passed that on to Joanna Colessa to run many years later. And I, to be honest with you, I'm not sure if they still do it, but I do think they still get together. And in the early days, there were big agencies involved. We were probably mid-size in the early days. And then as it went on and Eastwick/Hotwire got bigger, yes, we were one of the bigger agencies, and there were people of, agencies of all sizes that joined.
But
And,
multinationals or all primarily independents, smaller
nope,
or owned by the principals?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Oh, you had
Yep.
Multinationals represented as well. Oh, okay. I thought it was just entrepreneurs.
So like
Okay.
Todd Irwin
Yeah,
would
yeah, of
come.
course. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just
Okay.
example. So
Right.
we had definitely kind of every flavor of agency represented. And it became kind of like a hot ticket. People wouldn't miss it. They really wanted to come. So we held them quarterly. We just talked about what was going on in the industry, challenges that we were having. People were willing, you build trust over time. Of course, no one, shared, their deepest, darkest secrets or strategic plans or anything like that. But there was definitely a lot to talk about in terms of, I would say, hiring and staffing was a huge topic that we talked about, because that's obviously one of the number one issues and concerns of any kind of service organization. We just talked about what was happening in the market, trends from the client side, those swings that we've talked about in terms of the pendulum swinging. Like all of a sudden, everyone's going back to wanting to work. Purchasing is driving the decisions, and you have to pick one big multinational agency. And then over time, have you guys noticed that you're getting parts of business that they may be working for, a big agency, Edelman, but all of a sudden there's this one group that wants to work with their own independent. And then the next thing you know, every division within that company is, working with a small boutique agency. That pendulum has swung many times, that
Right.
cycle.
Did you have to have any agreements going into this? Like, for instance, was there an agreement around we won't poach talent from each other's agencies? Because I know, especially when talent is quite tight, that can be a real point of contention. I used to get agency owners calling me and complaining about, agency owner X because they had, poached, X number of their talent. So did you have to have any agreements going into a situation like this?
No, and we did not. I think there was kind of a unwritten agreement that we wouldn't share what was shared in the dinners outside of that group. But I have a feeling about that particular issue. If you are someone who is vulnerable to poaching, you need to stop complaining about who's doing the poaching, and you need to look at what you're not doing or doing wrong for your staff to make that such an issue. And then I would also say, this happens in life. Once you get to know someone and they become a colleague or a friend or an acquaintance, you're less likely to do something wrong by them, you know? So we didn't have to sign
Yep.
anything,
Yep.
but I think people were less likely to poach others that they'd gotten to know in those dinners. So.
Yeah, let me ask both of you a question as industry observers. And Aarti, this relates to what you just had. We've gone out of our way to view some of the biggest and best agency owners that have been successful. Barbara was just talking about this context of what I call abundance, is that we're going to do better. We're all going to learn in a community or a mastermind. So both of you, but Aarti, your point, those folks that used to call you and complain about those small things, they used to call you and complain, would they make it to our podcast? Did they really succeed? Or did their scarcity mindset keep them from being people that we want to talk to?
I think many of them, continue to struggle. Like, to me, it was a big red flag when an agency owner was calling me to complain that they couldn't keep talent, because to Barbara's point, they were not. Yeah, but talent to me was always the big one. Yeah, I mean, they would talk about losing clients, but usually once you lose talent, you start to lose clients, right? Clients don't like that kind of instability and their account teams. And that's why the owners were so upset that they were losing talent, because they knew that this was jeopardizing the client relationship, right? To me, that was always a red flag. And I think clients thought of agency owners sort of thought of it as a flex of like, I think, part of being a journalist in this business is you're part therapist, and people will just call you as a trusted source that they can just vent to you. But to me, that was always a red flag that something was amiss in their culture. Some of them took that seriously and reflected and made changes. Others, I think their attrition rate is still very, very high. And I think they're struggling in this current environment because of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, Barbara, I see you violently agreeing with that whole concept of scarcity and abundance.
I 100% agree with that. And in fact, there's kind of a little bit of a joke that was picked up and kind of spread around, I think. I'm not sure, during the Hotwire acquisition time, when people found out about our group, that I was nicknamed the godmother of Silicon Valley. And people made it seem like it was like I was all knowing. And you know what it was? It was mostly because I was willing to answer the phone when people called.
Cared.
And I was not afraid of my competition. I just wasn't. And yeah, of course, I'm going to fight to the death on things and be as competitive as the next person. But I did have that abundance mindset, Bill, in that, especially in a niche, what we do in the tech industry specifically is quite niche when you look at kind of scope of it all. Maybe less now, but, back in the day, it really was that we kind of had to, we blazed the trail in many ways and in many things. And we kind of had to do that by bonding together and setting the standards on things. And so, yeah, I didn't mind when someone called up and said, hey, have you ever run into this? Or I'm having this issue, or can you share this document with me? If it, sometimes a legal document or something like that. Yeah. So, yeah, Bill, I get your questioning on that. It's interesting. And I'm not surprised to hear Aarti's answer.
Yeah.
I want to caveat this by saying, I do know that we have had people on this podcast that have taken another approach where they were a bit more heads down, and they did sort of protect their territory kind of aggressively, and maybe ruffled some feathers along the way. I think that's probably a riskier approach. I don't think everybody can go at it alone and be successful. But you have to know yourself, right? And a little bit to know whether you're someone who could do it that way.
Yeah.
It's a good one. Barbara, I want to talk about agency world today from your observation, but specifically about the principals at the owner at an agency. And then I've got this theoretical triangle in my head, is that as agencies go to market, there are three sides to the triangle, or 3 points on the triangle. One is the owner's personal brand, the agency or some of their unique products would be the third brand. And so you've got personal, company, and product. Talk a little bit about that from your experience and then what you're seeing today. And I'm particularly interested about this notion of a personal brand and how it drives growth and drives leads, that person needs to be on stage, out front, evangelizing. Thought leadership is what gets bantied about. Yeah. So can you talk about those three corners of the brand?
Yeah. I think I was a little bit of a late bloomer to this one, Bill, because, and it's funny, this is part of the strategy that we counsel our clients on, and yet we don't necessarily follow our own strategic advice. So it was a bit of a joke between Elaine and Nancy and I, the three principals of Eastwick, on who was going to be the CEO of the agency that year. We would draw straws, and whoever had the shortest straw had to be the CEO that year, because none of us really were the type. We were more like behind the curtain people. We weren't necessarily, at least I thought I was behind the curtain people. Eventually I became in front of the curtain person, but we relate to that. We really spent a lot of time building the Eastwick brand and not an individual brand of the principals. Now we did develop product early on, and Aarti knows this, some of the stuff that we did that really differentiated ourselves early on. So I would say that agency brand and product brand came more naturally to us, but I 100% saw a huge difference when I became the sole principal of the agency and put a lot more effort into my own personal brand and how that benefited the agency overall. And I think Heather, I'm going back to my predecessor who now runs Hotwire Global. She got that message much earlier on, and she's always done a really good job of making sure her brand is incredibly strong and that it benefits the agency overall. So I think if you're counseling your clients, Bill, that they need to really have all three of those, I think that's a very smart counsel on your part. And that I think a lot of either agency owners don't have the personality, they're shyer, they're a little bit more introverts, which there are,
Sure.
Especially in the industry, because we tend to be kind of nerdy. And and you don't have to have a big personality to have a brand out in the marketplace. But I also think that's the last priority that they put on their list. I have to hire people. I have to, I've got clients I need to and so it becomes an excuse that you don't have time to invest in your personal brand. And I bet you hear a lot of that, Bill.
Absolutely.
But
absolutely. But it is the way we're
taught.
I'm here to tell you it was a big turning point for
right.
in the success of our business. Mm-hmm.
Well, I want to push Bill a little bit on these three separate points of this triangle, because I wonder if those exist independently of each other anymore, right? I mean, in this era of, we see what's happening with Elon and Tesla, Bezos and Amazon, Zuck and his properties, and to some degree, even in our own business, right? I mean, Richard Edelman's, what he says about his own personal perspective bleeds over into the company reputation and even how the products and services are evaluated. So I don't know, Bill, do you think these 3 points exist as 3 separate points on a triangle anymore?
Yeah, well, so not to get too theoretical into the model, one way to talk about it would be 3 pillars, and I think that's not accurate. I think that you can up and down the side because your personal brand impacts your business brand, because we do know when the principal has had a failing, moral, financial, significant, it impacts the company brand. And maybe it can protect the product brand. Maybe it could survive. But even that, I think, is influenced by both axes. So no, I do all fit together, because if you take out those edges, it's a circle. And then, I definitely think that the linkage is there. What I think Barbara's wise counsel is, and my take for today, is that I'm just going to be behind ABC PR, and ABC PR is going to be what the world knows. I don't think that works because people want to work with humans authentically. Maybe there's an AI agency out there that's not relevant, but I think for what we're talking about in the strategic wisdom
Yeah.
business, absolutely. Whether our digital offering is called Digital 360 2000 or our analytics offering has a name, that you can argue that round or square whether that should be that.
Yeah.
A good owner should consider the 3 points.
Mm-hmm. On the product side, yeah, I totally agree, Bill. And on the product side, I would say the biggest benefit is so that clients know your specialty. Like they know what you're good at, but also, you know, if you are, this industry has changed so much. Oh my God, you guys, when I first started, we were faxing press release
Yeah.
to the journalists.
Yeah.
I know that makes me sound like an
No.
absolute
I-
gent,
Mhm.
but
What's a fax? What's a fax machine?
Yeah, what's fax machine? Exactly. But if you don't, you know, if you're not keeping ahead of what's happening and driving influence in your client's market, you're going to be behind before everyone starts talking about it. So that was a job that I personally took on as a leader in the agency, is to try to look forward and see what was the changes were and what was happening. And I know for my own sake, even today when I make decisions, do I want to work with like an old stale brand who's sitting on like old thoughts and technology and all that? No, I want to work with someone who's like on top of it, like knows what's happening and is going to keep me safe from making bad decisions.
But I want to also remind everyone what's old is new again, right? And so,
Yes.
right? And so not losing sight of like that, talking about the fax machine. I mean, I remember when I was an early journalist, like we sat next to the fax machine and we watched the press releases come in, right? But now there's this movement back to tangible media, right? There's this movement back to we were learning how ephemeral everything online is. And that, there is value in having something printed and vetted, and permanent in that way. So I think that I think we do tend to chase after everything that's new, not realizing that there is some wisdom in the past and what we knew, and how some of that is going to reemerge in various ways. And as we've talked about, the pendulum swings so many times. I mean, some things are going to be lost, will be permanently lost, right? I mean, I don't think we're going to do clip books anymore, where the thud factor. We all remember the thud factor, right?
Let's hope not.
Well, speaking of that, like, can I ask you about legacy? You were building something big. You have 2 daughters who I believe are also in our business, one of whom
Yes.
I think works at Hotwire. When you were making your decision to sell, did you have a moment where you thought, do I want to leave a legacy for my children, especially because they're expressing interest in what I do? Or was sort of selling kind of the more logical choice for everyone's future?
So I did say for a long time I would never sell. And the reason why I said that was because I honestly had just seen so many train wrecks that there wasn't good examples out there that it was a smart business decision to make. And I also thought, you know what, I could pass this down to my daughters. They are both, eventually my youngest daughter went into it. I think she tried everything not to do what her mom and her big sister did, but she failed and she's very successful at it. But I do, I definitely thought that I might do that. What changed my mind was seeing, and again, this sounds super corny and you've heard it a million times, but when the Hotwire opportunity came, it really was a 1 + 1 = 3. Like, it was going to allow me to make the business that I was running something better and different than I could have on my own. So that was one thing that it became very interesting. Like, this could be a very cool, um, combining of forces and to create something really interesting. But the other thing I finally quickly realized was, I didn't really want to put that burden on my kids. My kids were still relatively, young in their careers. And did I want to decide for them that they were going to be agency owners? Or did I want to be able to provide them the financial backing and security for them to do whatever they wanted once it got to that point. And ultimately, so you can better believe I had conversations with them because they knew that all along that I had been thinking about passing the business on to them. So when I had changed my mind for this one opportunity, of course I talked to them about it. And they 100% actually appreciated it, agreed. And because at that point, they didn't know, if that's what they wanted to do. But I did know that if I did go through with the sale, and quite honestly, I made more money than I ever dreamed I would make with the acquisition. So I'm here to tell you, if you pick the right acquirer, it can be a really wonderful win-win-win situation for everybody. But if my kids wanted to start their own business, they'll have the opportunity to do that because of what I gained from the acquisition.
Wow. Well,
This has
Barbara,
been a great conversation.
Great. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Illuminating. And I think you very much live up to the icons moniker that we call this series.
Well, thank you very much. And Aarti, I've always appreciated that you and I could have real conversations over the years, no matter what was going on in the industry. And, honestly, I really like your last statement about what is old is new again. I cannot tell you in the last year how many times a former colleague, or more importantly, a former client has emailed or texted me and said, "Can you believe?" And it's usually a press release announcing something that we announced 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, it's new again.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, that is, I can relate to that. That I think, I think the message there too is, don't be comfortable with the status quo. Look at everything
Mm-hmm.
new with fresh eyes. And it means if you keep on doing things or go back to doing things you've done before. But I think if you're someone who wants to be on automatic pilot, you're probably not going to be very successful.
Right. Yes. No, there's a cyclical nature to this. And if you've been, honestly, anyone who's been around this business long enough recognizes that at some point, right? When you start hearing things that you thought were retired turns of phrase, ways of classifying agencies, and then they come back with a vengeance. And, I think that's kind of exciting. But it also means that, to your point, I love the point that you made, Barbara, that don't ride the roller coaster. Yeah. Because they're like, but Bill, you made a great point too, is to some people, that's part of the thrill. Like they got into this because they wanted a ticket on that roller coaster. So I think that's part of what these conversations are, right? It's sort of helping people find out who they are. Are they someone who wants to ride the roller coaster, or do they want to be on the, do they want to just be on the ground?
It's funny because it sounds like I'm saying, be like no emotion. That's not it. But, because I'm also a big believer that you need to celebrate all the small successes too, because this is so hard that if you're not celebrating even the small successes, you deplete that energy much by dealing with all the hard stuff and stress. But me personally, if I had over the 35 years gone all the ups and downs the way I did, I don't know if my heart could have handled it.
Right. Well, no, and I think so. And I want to close on is something that you said then is, those small wins, celebrating those small wins. And I think that owners underappreciate how important that is. I had lunch one time with someone, a very, very talented person in our business. Very talented. Most people I think would know his name. But he was leaving the business. He was leaving our industry. And I asked him why. And he said, because you can never actually celebrate a win. He said, you have a great win. And the next day it's right back to, okay, what can you do for me today?
My point.
Yes, exactly. And I think that is detrimental. And to our point about talent, right? You lose great people, you lose your clients eventually. And that stuck with me when he said, I said to him, I said, look at all these successes you've had. And he said, I never had a chance to enjoy them. He said, because the moment I had one success, it was like, all right, what can you do for us next? What piece of business can you win now? So I think that's an important point.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and coming back to what you said, Bill, this all relates to that we're all just human. We're
Mm-hmm.
human, and yeah, we have
Yeah.
Yeah.
emotions and all
We
that
would
kind of
all
stuff
benefit
too.
if we acted like it a little bit more often.
Yeah.
And
Acted a little
and
human
I
every
would
now and then.
predict, yes, in this world of AI and everything's sort of, there's a layer of artificiality and everything that we do, and conformity, right? I think that's part of what's been happening, right? When everything is sort of digitally oriented, it becomes kind of the same. I think being human is going to be what will make agencies, relationships stand out. And I think people are kind of exhausted by things being really transactional.
I agree. I hear a lot of this from my kids who are, in their mid 30s in the business right now, that the exhaustion with the transactional portion is a real thing.
Yeah, no, I think this is like a future conversation I think we need to have is how much that what it means to sort of be human. I think that's a real question. I don't think there is a consensus around this, right? So, for a lot of people, like scrolling their phones was connection, and I think obviously that's backfiring now. But I think what we grew up with, like I said, I think our parents had it right? The bowling leagues and things like they were, and then that all went away, and we were just like, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Very good.
yeah.
All right. Great spending time with you guys. Thank you.
Well, Aarti, you did it again. So I really appreciate the introduction to Barbara. It was terrific. I think, kind of one of the big key takeaways, and it may not be the most impactful thing she said, but it's the thing that I've been most curious about, is this notion of rotating CEOs. And I just thought that can be great if everybody's aligned on culture, or man, that could be just, an apple, a tomato, and a cucumber running the company all in different directions. And so I thought that was the key takeaway. But genuinely, thank you for the introduction and the conversation.
Yeah, and to that point about the rotating CEOs, right? I mean, they may feel like they're aligned on culture, but there are all of these personality nuances that I'm sure, right, that the staff that their employees would feel. And then it's a little bit of confusion of like, well, do I built a really great rapport with Barbara as CEO. Do I need to now go to this other person for this? So I think I would be curious if there are any agencies out there that are experimenting with the same model, and how that's working out for them, because it does feel really difficult. What I loved, Bill, is I loved that you asked her the question about retirement, and was that sort of a dirty word in her mind, right? Because I think so much of being an entrepreneur, it sounds like, is really committing and dedicating yourself to this, and really not really thinking beyond this business. And I thought she was really truthful in her answer, that she didn't expect that she would completely ease into retirement, but she has, and she's loved it. And younger people look to her and say, how do I get to where you are, living in Carmel and kind of having most of your, owning most of your time again.
Yeah, no, it's great. Again, great conversation, a lot for everybody to learn, and I certainly enjoyed it.
Yes. Well, we will be back again for another episode of Heart and Science with the Icon series.